I'm joined here today with the first guest on our depth chat, not to be confused with depth chart, Gus Logue. You guys can follow Gus at Gus_Logue on Twitter. He's the founder of Duval22.com. He's also the site manager of Big Cat Country. So make sure you're following Gus along. Before we get started, I also want you guys to make sure that you are liking and subscribing the page. We're a new company. We're building from scratch, totally. So any support that you guys can show in terms of following us on our social channels, and as we build out these YouTube pages, we'll definitely really appreciate, because we're going to be planning on doing a lot more of this type of content, a lot more of these types of interviews as we go into the summer months. So Gus, thank you so much for joining us, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited to be here. Always happy to talk ball, especially in the off season. It's always fun to just dream up hypotheticals, as you know. And now there's no better place to go than depth-chart.com. So very excited for you in this website, hoping for the best and thrilled to be your first guest.
I appreciate that so much, man. So speaking of hypotheticals, I read this crazy article today on Big Cat Country by someone named Gus Logue about shipping off Brian Thomas Jr. It was BTJ Mekari, a first rounder, right? For Maxx Crosby and a fourth. First of all, I freaking love it. I really don't like Mekari. I've said this like 100 times. Like, I'm really low on him, so getting him out would be fine, and doing all that stuff. I really do think there's a lot of legs in not necessarily like trading BTJ or like wanting to, like, but I think there are a lot of legs in terms of him not being the ultimate fit, right? Not that they can't make him fit in that offense and what they're trying to do, but like if Liam could build the kind of receiver that he wanted, to do that, I'm not so sure it would be him. And it's not necessarily his talent, right? It's just the makeup and wiring and stuff like that. Like Parker Washington's much more of like a Liam, like dog, right? Type of guy.
Yeah.
So, it's always sad to move on from a player going into year 3, especially one that made the Pro Bowl as a rookie. Like a year ago, you'd be like, this is nuts, right? But I really like this trade. Tell us a little bit more about it and kind of the logic when you came up with it.
Yeah, I'm definitely trying to like hold myself back a little bit this offseason with like the big fish free agents and like just trade candidates, etc., draft prospects, especially because the Jaguars don't really have a lot of capital. They're already like kind of below budget in terms of the salary cap. So regarding the Brian Thomas trade, I definitely think it's one of those scenarios where like the Jaguars don't want to trade him unless they get an offer that's too good to refuse, which certainly a lot of like pretty much any team could say that about almost any good player. But I do think, kind of to your point, like the Jaguars view Brian Thomas as a very valuable part of their offense because of his like kind of game-breaking speed. He's great at beating press off of the line of scrimmage. He's definitely a difference maker, but if another team views him as like the whole like part of their offense and a potential alpha for the offense and like really worth trading considerable assets for, then sure, Jacksonville can consider it. But really, like if they get like a first and a day 3 pick for Brian Thomas Jr., like it would probably be fair compensation, but I'd be like, Brian Thomas Jr. is super talented and super young and super cheap. So like you should keep him for all those reasons, basically. So I thought that like the only reason that I think the Jaguars should trade Brian Thomas this offseason is if it were in exchange for a better player. And so whoop-de-doo, Bill Williamson of Black and Silver Pride, which covers the Raiders for SB Nation, kind of like reached out to the group of site managers at SB Nation and said, hey, I'm fielding like mock proposals for Maxx Crosby. And so the whole offseason, I was trying to kind of like hold myself back, not dive too far into like all the big fish free agents, because the Jaguars are kind of already below budget in terms of the salary cap. And they obviously don't have their first rounder this year because of the Travis Hunter trade. And so because of their kind of lack of assets, I was like, they're probably not going to make like a huge move after making a huge move just last offseason. But since Bill sent the email, I figured I'd send one back. And I think Brian Thomas, again, makes sense if it's for a better player. And then I threw in the 2027 first because I feel like Crosby requires at least one first rounder. So I feel like between BT and the 2027 first, that's a pretty solid offer, or at least like a good initial offer to kind of like start a conversation. But then I threw in Patrick Mekari because, as you kind of hinted at, he's had an up and down short tenure in Jacksonville. He was signed just last offseason to a 3-year deal. He has no guaranteed money left on his contract after this season. And so I think he makes a lot of sense for the Raiders because, like, they're about to have a rookie first overall quarterback. They're about to have a first time but offensive minded head coach. They've got two like elite weapons already in Brock Bowers and Ashton Genty. And so, but especially for Mendoza, like the rookie quarterback, you want to bolster the offensive line. And because he doesn't have a lot of guaranteed money left, you're going to have an easy out kind of if it doesn't work out. And so I think it kind of makes sense for both sides. It helps to balance the books for Jacksonville, which is the main reason that they would include him. Like, even if he's been up and down in his 1 year in Jacksonville, it would like leave a gaping hole at right guard in the starting depth chart. And so then that's something that you'd have to look at in the offseason is filling that hole, filling also the hole that Brian Thomas Jr. would leave, and also trying to like get back a bunch of draft capital, which is why I asked for, I think it was a 4th back from the Raiders in the mock offer I sent to Bill. So yeah, I don't think it's going to happen, especially now that like the Bills just gave the Bears a bunch of draft capital. Now I think the Bears are probably like the heavy favorites to land Crosby, but even if not the Bears, like I think the Bucks have a pretty good shot. And a long list of other teams, the Niners too. Those would probably be the top 3 off the top of my head. And the Jaguars, I'd say, have like the 12th to 20th best odds of landing him, just because of all the reasons I laid out. And really the only other, I know I'm rambling, but like the only other scenario I kind of thought of for a Crosby trade, because Jacksonville doesn't really have 2 first round picks that they can offer, would be the 2027 first round pick and Trayvon Walker. But I kind of think that the Jaguars would sooner just extend Trayvon Walker and pay him upwards of $40 million a year, as opposed to trading him and a first round pick and maybe even more for a player who's better than him, but also like 6-7 years his elder.
Yeah, for sure. I think they love Trayvon so much that it's kind of a different conversation, right? Like everything we talked about BTJ and like not the ideal puzzle piece into what they're trying to build in that final picture in that wide receiver depth chart. Well, Trayvon's kind of the opposite, right? Like if they can redraft him again, they would type of thing, because he's everything that they want. Looking at the Raiders depth chart that we got pulled up here, right guard penciled Alex Kappa, Jackson Powers Johnson there in the middle. Their receiver room's a mess, like you said, right? They can put Brian Thomas Jr. either at the Z or the X because they really don't have a good solution for either. And you're bringing in a rookie quarterback in Fernando Mendoza. You cannot throw him to the wolves with no offensive line, no weapons. You check 2 boxes right there with the trade. And to your point, you probably will have to add that first round pick, just because if you're monitoring the situation on Twitter, it feels like the sweepstakes is getting higher and higher every hour. Like if you're following Raiders Twitter, Cowboys Twitter, all these people, it's starting to feel like the Raiders price is going up and up and up, and they're getting more offers, kind of like what happened to us with Quinnen Williams before the deadline, where we really thought that, you know, that's something that we might get done before the fold, and then Crazy Jerry comes out of nowhere, you know, with 2 first round picks, and he's like, hey, I'm going to steal this from you. But you made a good, interesting point, is we really haven't heard the Jags much, right? And it feels like this is going to be our approach a little bit, is that moving in silence, right? Real G's move in silence like lasagna. And that's another G is James Gladstone doing those things. So it's very par for the course. Is kind of your sense too, like in terms of our maneuverability, and just, I mean, it started with the combine and the draft, you know, and that was a big talking point. And, you know, we're kind of not that big, sexy team in terms of getting in the chatter.
Yeah, it definitely feels like they're moving in silence, partly because like Liam Cohen and James Gladstone skipped the combine because they want to not be in the meetings with prospects so as to remove bias, which certainly makes a lot of sense. And then also, like, I just don't think they're going to be big spenders in free agency because of like the cap kind of resources that we detailed earlier. Like they've got Trayvon Walker, Parker Washington, other guys to pay, but like, also, it's like pretty quiet out of Jacksonville. Like the Travis Hunter trade last year, there wasn't really any like rumors or speculation about it until the morning of the first round of the 2025 draft. And even then, it was just speculation as opposed to like report, the Jacksonville Jaguars have like very strong interest in trading up to the second overall pick. And so I do think they're going to move in silence a little bit. I would expect this free agency to be a little bit more like Gardeck type signings, or like the center that they got out of Tampa Bay last year.
Haynes,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, like guys that like you like haven't like kind of sort of heard of, but like they play really hard, and like the Jaguars think that they're just like the right type of guys for their building and their culture, and that like if they bring them in with their coaching staff, which is really good too, then they can kind of hone in on fundamentals and technique a little bit and be able to just get the most out of the player, and the player be able to get the most out of himself, which will help the team. And so I think it will be a lot of under the radar signings like Hainsey, like Gardeck, that'll we'll hopefully look back on and be like, man, that was a nice underrated move for a guy that ended up being a glue piece as opposed to like going big game hunting.
For sure, and I agree with you 100%. And I was beating this drum starting like 4 or 5 weeks ago, and it's funny because I'm seeing a lot of the Jax media now start to echo a lot of the stuff, and it's about the compensatory picks, right? Like you're not gonna just let some of these guys go in this type of a situation and not get anything back in return when there is a mechanism that exists that you can get something back in return for a Devin Lloyd and Travis Etienne. So when you traditionally look at the types of teams that get those compensatory picks back, they're the best teams that operate in the league, right? These are the teams that move differently. The Eagles are always have a ton, 49ers have a ton, Ravens. So I think you're going to start to see the Jaguars being talked and bandied about a little bit in those conversations, which is really exciting to be kind of considered in that class. And it hasn't it felt a lot like autopilot since Tony Baselli and everybody came. I'm not worried at all.
Yeah, like the only thing to worry about, I feel like, is sample size, because like everything that we've seen so far and heard about so far, like has been pretty positive. Like, I mean, obviously it would have been nice to have a little bit more like depth on the defensive line last year. The Jaguars could have made that a little bit more of a priority in their first offseason under this new leadership unit. But at the same time, I understand what they did in terms of like sitting back and not forcing it. Like, good value didn't really come to them. There was like one of the top kind of rumors following the draft is that the Jaguars were interested in edge rusher. I believe Ashton Gillott out of Louisville.
Gelati, yeah.
Yes. And like the Chiefs sniped the Jaguars and a lot of other teams that were interested in him. The Jaguars wanted to pick him in the third round, I'm pretty sure. And so like we're definitely looking at like making heavier investments that they ended up making. And so it'd be interesting to see this offseason, like whether they kind of like push the needle further and they're more aggressive because they weren't as aggressive last offseason, or if they kind of like stick to their roots basically and like don't lose control and like lose sight of who they are as an organization.
100% agree with you. And there's a lot of those mercenary types, right? That those Jadeveon Clownies, right? That you could sign for a year, and after the draft and just fill any holes that they might have not done to the caliber that they wanted to, depending on how the draft shakes out. And I believe that compensatory pick deadline is the Monday, I think, before the draft, actually. Either the Monday before or the Monday after. But as soon as that deadline passes, you're free to go. Like, you could sign away and it's not going to factor into any of that formula. So that's why I agree with you. I think it's going to be very quiet. And then you'll see a lot of patching, right? And,
Yeah.
And when you hear patching, a lot of times people think like, ew, like, no, I don't want, these B tier, C tier players. But that's not always the case. Like a lot of these veterans, like a Cameron Jordan or Bradley Chubb that got released, right? So they might want to wait till after the draft. In fact, a lot of times they like to wait till after the draft because they know that this is probably going to be the last bite of the apple for me. I'm not going to sign with a team like New England or Seattle, even though they're good teams and I know I can make a Super Bowl run. I'm not going to sign with them simply because I don't want to get like Wally pipped by a first round pick in the draft, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I'm kind of the mentor, filling in instead of
Don't want to be Michael Penix. It's true.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, whether you're like the top of the market guy who's going to get paid more than anyone, or like you're a guy who's going to get signed at the end of training camp and you're like a 15-year NFL veteran who's going to be more of a veteran voice than anything really productive on the field. Like everyone wants playing time, and so it definitely makes sense to wait until after the draft. I remember last year Jacksonville signed Emmanuel Ogbah, I think like a day after the draft ended.
Yeah,
So that kind of lines
same
up with
thing.
what you were saying in terms of like you're able to get out of like the compensatory pick rule, definitely by the time the draft begins.
And for sure, and that's a great example. Although Ogba didn't really work out very well this year, which I was a little bit surprised about because he wasn't too terribly old, and he did have some good recent seasons, but
Yeah.
it hits you at different points. Like, it's not
I
linear.
was gonna say he's not old on paper, but like
Yeah,
he was old on film.
it hits you at different points. So yeah, another thing I wanted to ask you about, only because we've talked about moving in silence, but there has been one rumble in terms of Jonathan Jones reporting about Kenneth Walker potentially being a fit here. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I had a tweet a week ago. Let me pull it up as I
Sure.
stall for time here. But Liam Cohen just had like a really interesting comment about Travis Etienne, like in the middle of the season. It was after like a week 14 game, I believe, and a reporter asked Liam like how Travis Etienne's vision looked in the previous game, which I'm not quite sure what it was, but bear with
Is
me.
I think it was something like the running back, the good running backs are the ones that could create beyond what's presented to them, like something of that nature.
Yeah, I've got the exact quote right here. I mean, you nailed it, but he said ultimately backs get paid to make people miss at the second and third level and get more than what the play is expected to get. If the play is
Yes.
blocked to ultimately get 4 yards, their job is to get eight. That's ultimately what we judge backs by. And so I thought it was pretty wild for him to just like throw that comment out. It was in the middle of the season, but it also was about a player who's in his contract year and playing pretty well. And so like I don't know. You could like make a bunch of assumptions about that. Maybe the Jaguars think that like ETN isn't that type of player who can like consistently turn 4 yards into eight. He
Hmm.
certainly does it a lot, but I think like the reason they'd be interested in Kenneth Walker is because he does that at a higher clip. He has he had 67 runs, 15 plus mile per hour runs last year, which is the 14th most by any NFL player and the eighth most by any NFL running back since 2018, according to Next Gen Stats. And so he's fast. We all saw it. Like he made himself a lot of money in the playoffs, and especially winning Super Bowl MVP. But like I think he could be end up being worth the money. I think like he might not end up being a good value, quote unquote, because I'm sure there will be like a good market for him. But I think ETN will end up being like a good value relatively, just because I think he's a little bit more well rounded. Even if he's not quite as explosive, he certainly still is explosive. I think like a lot of the teams that have been rumored to like want running backs too, like have pretty solid offensive situations from Denver, Kansas City, New Orleans. ETN could return home there because he's from New Orleans.
Yeah.
The Giants you could talk yourself into. So like a lot of good spots for ETN and Walker, and so I'll be interested to see where they end up. But I think based on Cohen's quote, basically, like I think they'd be interested in the going like all in on the Kenneth Walker sweepstakes for like a guy that's truly a game breaker,
Yeah.
or they're going to go bargain hunting at the position.
I do think it's interesting. Like looking at our free agency rankings, Kenneth Walker's the 17th graded player overall in the free agency class, 81.45 grade. And then ETN wasn't too far behind. I mean, he's 24th, right, to your point, but 79.72. It's almost a two whole point. And like in our grading system, that's quite a lot, right? So it's a big difference. It's funny you were saying this because I was messaging with my buddy starting in October, right? And I literally have the receipt and said, "Hey, ETN's been cool, but if we ever got Kenneth Walker into this Liam Cohen offense, we would go into a totally different stratosphere, And lo and behold, like I see all this, and you got that Chad Morton connection, everything like that on top
Right.
of it. There's a lot of reasons why it would make sense. The only thing would be, do you want to give yourself? Do you basically maybe want to give away a third round pick, compensatory pick, by making a move like that on the front end? To sign somebody like that, it's a really tough decision to make. So it's going to be interesting, like you said earlier in the show about sample size. It's going to be really interesting that now we're going to start getting a little bit more of that sample size, so we get a feel for how this regime operates and all that. So is this going to be a cap clearing year where we just see what we can shake up and get in the draft on the other end and clear that 43 plus million of dead cap and go, re-sign some players and go all in next year? Are they targeting 2028 as the year to go all in like the Rams usually do with the new stadium and everything like that? That's another thought that I had too, right? Like it could make sense. Like you never want to throw years away. You never want to go into a year thinking you can't do something, right? But you can build in a way that will climax to a certain point, because the Rams used to do it quite a bit.
Yeah, I think their plan is to win in 2026/2027 because like they got pretty close. Like the playoff loss was pretty brutal because it feels like if they could have gotten past the Bills in the wild card round, like they might have really been able to go all the way, or at least to the Super Bowl and be able to take on that vaunted Seahawks defense. But I think the team like believes that they're pretty close and that like 2025 was no fluke. And so I think that like because of the cap and like draft pick resource allocation, as we've mentioned, like I don't think they're going to be very aggressive at the start of the offseason or at the start of the new league calendar year. They're going to be like mostly reloading and kind of reloading draft assets, like kind of like restructuring, letting players go, getting compensatory picks, getting like low budget glue guys who are just like more gritty than like super athletic. And like they're just gonna like be patient in terms of like waiting for a big move or three. And like maybe they'll present itself in free agency right away, and Trey Hendrickson will say like, "Hey, I really want to be in Florida. Like I'm willing to sign at like a little bit of a discount, especially since I'm already gonna get that like no state income tax discount or whatever."
Yeah, if you follow
like
Bucks fans on Twitter, they're like convinced he's coming to
I think the Bucks are due for a big move. I don't know what it's
Yeah.
going to be, but I think
They're printing
like
the
it's
Hendrickson
kind of like
shirts
the last
already,
year of
man.
Todd Bowles, it seems like, and so I feel like they're going to make a big splash. For Jacksonville, it could come in free agency. Maybe it'll present itself in the draft. Maybe it'll present itself like during training camp, like a preseason trade. Maybe it'll present itself during like roster cuts before the season as well, or maybe it'll present itself at the trade deadline. And if not, maybe like big moves will present itself in 2027. But I think they'll be kind of ready to pounce, but like try not to be like impatient and like just wait for the right opportunities.
Well, it sounds like we're on the same wavelength, 100%,
Yeah.
in terms of that approach. So, and it makes all the sense in the world.